The city looked different at night. It wasn't just the lights or the rain or even the low hum of cars far below. It was the silence that settled between those sounds. A silence heavy enough to hold secrets. Elaine Porter sat by her window every night after work, a cup of tea cooling in her hands, watching the city breathe. She was 45, divorced, no children. The kind of woman who kept her apartment tidy because it gave her control over something, at least. She lived alone in a high-rise building on Sycamore Street. Across from her, separated by a narrow stretch of air and streetlight, stood another building. Older, quieter. Its walls stained by decades of rain. She'd watched it for years. Not because it was interesting, but because it was always there. Same walls, same shadows. Until one night something changed. It started with a light, a small lamp, glowing from a window on the 4th floor of the building across the street. At first she thought nothing of it. People lived there. They came and went. Lights turned on, lights turned off. But this one stayed on, every single night, and no one ever came to the window. After a few days, Elaine began to notice things. Little things. The same curtain slightly pulled back. The same faint movement behind the glass. Then, a shadow. A tall figure pacing, slowly, deliberately. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The figure stopped, and for a long moment it seemed to be looking straight at her. Elaine froze, breath held. A chill ran up her spine. Then, just as suddenly, the shadow turned and disappeared deeper into the apartment. Her tea was cold now. She let out a quiet, uneasy laugh, trying to shake the feeling. "You're imagining things," she whispered to herself. "People live their lives. You just happen to notice." But that night, when she tried to sleep, she couldn't. Her mind replayed the sight of that dark window, that still figure. It pressed against the edges of her thoughts, refusing to fade. The next morning, on her way to work, she looked up at the building again. The window was shut tight. From the street, it looked ordinary, harmless even. Just another city apartment. But to Elaine, it seemed different now, heavier somehow. That night, she found herself standing at her own window again, lights off, curtain half drawn. She told herself she wasn't watching, just looking, just curious. Then she saw it again, the same glow, the same curtain drawn back, and something else, a faint red mark on the glass. At first, she thought it was a reflection, maybe a taillight from a passing car. But as she focused, she realized it wasn't fading. Then the shadow returned. The tall figure moved across the room, dragging something, heavy, awkward, something that trailed behind. Elaine's heart pounded. She leaned closer, gripping the windowsill, but her breath fogged the glass. She wiped it quickly, eyes straining to see. The figure stopped, stood still, then slowly, deliberately, reached for the curtain, and the window went dark. She didn't move for several minutes. The city lights flickered around her, distant and indifferent. She could hear laughter from somewhere below. A car horn, the faint thrum of rain returning. Life continuing, as if nothing had changed. But Elaine felt changed. Something about that window had reached out and touched her. Like a whisper meant only for her to hear. She thought about calling someone. The police, maybe? But what would she say? That she saw a shadow? A red stain? A movement she couldn't explain. It would sound ridiculous, so she didn't. She sat in silence, eyes still fixed on the darkness across the street. Days passed. Work felt meaningless. Conversations blurred. Her world shrank even smaller than before. Every evening she found herself drawn back to that same spot, waiting, watching. The lamp, the window, the stillness. It was always the same. Until one night she saw something new. A shape slumped near the glass, barely visible but unmistakable. Human. Her pulse quickened. Her fingers trembled. She pressed her hand to her mouth, afraid to breathe. Afraid that sound alone might disturb whatever she was seeing. Then, slowly, the curtain across the street began to close. From the inside, Elaine stood there long after the window had gone dark, her reflection faint in the glass. Outside, the rain whispered against the city, carrying secrets between buildings. She tried to convince herself it meant nothing, that people had lives she couldn't see, that maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it looked through a single pane of glass. But deep down, she knew something terrible had happened, and for reasons she couldn't yet name, the window across the street had chosen her to see it. The days began to fold into one another like worn-out pages of the same story. Morning light, cold coffee, silence, work, the train, home, and every night, the same ritual. She would stand by the window, her face dimly reflected against the city's glow, eyes fixed on that one apartment across the street. The lamp still burned there sometimes. Other nights, it didn't. But even when it didn't, Elaine could feel it. That window, that presence, watching, waiting. One Sunday morning, while sipping her coffee, she decided to do something she hadn't done in years. Leave her apartment without a destination. She told herself she needed air, but as she turned down Sycamore Street, her steps slowed. Her gaze lifted toward that building across the way. It looked older up close. The paint was cracked, the balconies rusted. Half the mailboxes downstairs were covered with tape, names scratched out. The hallway beyond the entrance was dim, carrying the faint smell of damp paper and dust. She hesitated. Then quietly she stepped inside. Her heart pounded with every echo of her shoes against the floor. There was no sound except the creak of old pipes somewhere above. The building had a stillness that felt unnatural, like a place that had stopped breathing. She climbed the stairs slowly, hand grazing the railing. First floor, second, third. Then just as she reached the fourth, she heard something, a faint hum. Mechanical. Steady. It came from down the hall from the apartment whose window matched the one she'd been watching. She stopped outside the door. It was unmarked. No nameplate, no sign of life. But she could feel it. The same quiet vibration she'd felt through her own glass window. She pressed her ear to the door. At first, only silence. Then, a dull thump, followed by another, and another. Her breath caught. The noise stopped. She stepped back quickly, pretending to check her phone as footsteps echoed from another hallway. A man appeared tall, wearing a gray hoodie, carrying a bag of groceries. He barely looked at her as he passed, but she noticed his key the way he slipped it into the lock of that same door. Her stomach dropped. He went inside. Elaine left the building as calmly as she could. Once outside, she leaned against the wall and exhaled, trying to steady her shaking hands. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The man, the groceries, the sound. She watched for hours. The light came on. The curtain shifted. But this time, the shadow was clearer. Tall. Deliberate. Sometimes standing still for long stretches of time. Sometimes leaning close to the window as though listening. She couldn't see his face. But something about his stillness terrified her. Days turned into a blur. Elaine's apartment grew messy. Her tea went cold. Untouched. Work became a fog she barely moved through. At night, she started writing notes, small observations scrawled across sticky pads she kept near the window. Red marks still visible. Tall man, same jacket. Curtain closed again, morning. Something dragged. The notes multiplied like weeds. Her window became a wall of patterns, timelines, and fragments of meaning. She was building a map, a story only she could see. One evening, she noticed a change. The lamp across the street was gone. Not off gone. The window was empty, darker than usual. The curtains had been pulled aside completely, leaving a hollow black space behind the glass. Her heart pounded. Then movement, something metallic, glinting briefly. She squinted, leaning closer. And there it was. A camera, small, mounted to the inside of the window, pointed directly at her. Elaine stumbled backward, hitting her coffee table. Papers scattered across the floor. Her breathing came shallow, fast. No, she whispered. No, no, no. She turned off her lights, pulled the curtain shut, and stood in the dark, her pulse thundering in her ears. The thought coiled tight inside her mind. He's watching me too. All this time she thought she'd been the observer, but maybe she was the one being studied. She barely slept. The next morning she decided to call the police. They sent an officer, polite, young, unimpressed. He listened while she spoke, his gaze flicking toward her notes taped along the wall. When she pointed to the window and the dark apartment beyond, he squinted, frowned, and nodded slowly. He said they'd look into it. but she could tell from his tone that it meant nothing. When he left, she stood alone again, the silence in her apartment heavier than ever. That night the light returned, but this time, it wasn't the soft yellow glow of the lamp. It was colder, bluish, flickering, like a reflection from a television. And then, movement. The man stepped into view, closer than before. For the first time, she saw his face. Pale, sharp features, eyes too dark to read. He stood there for a long while, looking toward her side of the street. Then slowly, he raised his hand, not a wave, a gesture, like he was pointing. At her, Elaine stumbled back again, heart hammering. She closed her curtains completely, forcing herself to breathe. For a moment she stood there in the half-light of her apartment, trembling. Then she heard it. A knock, soft, once, on her own door. She froze. Another knock, slow, patient. She stepped closer. Her mind screamed not to, but her body moved anyway, drawn by something she couldn't name. When she looked through the peephole, the hallway beyond was empty. Her voice broke the silence. "Who's there?" No answer. But then she saw something on the floor. A small envelope slid under her door. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Inside was a single piece of paper. No words. Just a photograph of her own window, taken from across the street. Elaine dropped the envelope, heart pounding. The air felt colder now, as though the walls themselves were listening. She ran to her window, pulled the curtain back, and gasped. The opposite window was completely dark again, empty, still. But she could feel him there, watching. She sat down slowly, clutching the photo. Her pulse refused to calm. She knew now. She wasn't imagining any of it. Something was happening in that apartment. Something violent. Something that had reached across the street and into her own life. And for reasons she didn't yet understand, she had become part of it. Morning came gray and tired. Elaine hadn't slept. The photo still lay on her coffee table, edges curled from where she'd gripped it too tightly. Her window, her own silhouette captured from across the street. It felt like proof and threat, all at once. She called the police again, but this time her voice was too frantic, too full of tremors. They said an officer would follow up, if time allowed. Time never did. That night she decided she couldn't wait anymore. Rain began to fall as she crossed Sycamore Street. The pavement shimmered beneath the streetlights, each drop striking the ground like a tiny heartbeat. She pulled her coat tighter, holding her breath as she reached the door of the opposite building. It wasn't locked. Inside, the air was colder, the halls quiet. Her footsteps echoed against cracked tile and peeling paint. She climbed floor by floor, her pulse sinking with each step. When she reached the 4th floor, the corridor stretched before her like a long, dim tunnel. And there the door, the same one she'd seen the man enter days ago. She pressed her hand against it. It felt warm. Her mind raced. If she turned back now, no one would know. She could pretend none of it had ever happened. But something deeper pushed her forward, the same pull that had kept her watching. The same instinct that whispered, "You were meant to see." She tried the handle. It turned. The apartment smelled faintly of bleach and something metallic underneath. Inside it was almost empty, walls stripped, furniture gone. Only the lamp remained, sitting crooked on a table, its bulb flickering weakly. Elaine's breath came shallow. Her eyes swept the room bare floors, an overturned chair, a faint red stain near the window. She stepped closer. The mark wasn't on the glass anymore. It was on the floorboards, dried, faded. Her stomach twisted. Then something caught her eye, a small box sitting beneath the table. She crouched, hands trembling as she opened it. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them, each one of her, through her window, eating breakfast, reading, sleeping, sitting at her desk. Days, weeks, months of her life, all captured from across the street. Elaine dropped the box, backing away as her breath turned ragged. Then she heard the faint click of a door behind her. She spun around. The man stood in the doorway, the same one she'd seen from her window. Tall, pale, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the low hum of the lamp. Then he smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't human. It was the kind of smile that hides too many truths. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was calm, almost kind. "But I knew you'd come." Elaine stepped back, her mind screaming for her to run, but her body frozen in place. "What do you want?" she whispered. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "I wanted you to see what you've done." Her heart lurched. "What I've done?" He gestured toward the photographs scattered on the floor. "You think you were watching me, Elaine, but it was you I was sent to watch." She shook her head. "That's not possible. I don't even know you." He stepped closer. "You knew her, though, the woman who lived here before me." Elaine's throat tightened. She remembered faintly. An older tenant, friendly, quiet. She'd moved out months ago, or so Elaine had thought. What about her? The man's eyes darkened. She didn't move out. She disappeared, and the last person seen near this window was you. Elaine's knees nearly buckled. "That's not true." He crouched near the stains on the floor, running a gloved hand over them. "You used to visit her, didn't you? Tea, books, long nights talking by the window." Elaine's voice broke. "She was my friend." He looked up slowly. "And now she's gone." Her mind scrambled backward through memories. Cups of tea, soft laughter, the way that woman had smiled. And then, the night it rained harder than usual, she'd gone over to return a borrowed book. There had been an argument, voices raised, a fall, a sound she'd buried deep. Elaine's breath hitched. The man straightened. "You cleaned it up well, but not well enough." He stepped toward her, pulling something from his pocket, a badge. "Detective." "I've been waiting for you to come back," he said. "You couldn't stay away from the window, could you? Guilt doesn't let people rest." Her world tilted. The rain outside blurred into streaks of silver against the glass. All this time she had believed she was the witness, the victim. But the truth was far worse. She was the one being watched because she was the suspect. Elaine stumbled backward, shaking her head, the air burning in her lungs. No, it was an accident. I tried to help her." The detective nodded slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say." He reached for his radio, calling in quietly. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Elaine stood frozen by the window, the same window she'd spent months staring through, the one she thought had shown her the darkness in someone else's life. Now she realized it had been showing her own. The door burst open. 2 more officers entered. One of them began reading her rights, their voices muffled by the storm outside. Elaine turned once more toward the opposite building, her building where her apartment light still glowed faintly in the rain. She could see her own window, her own empty chair, the faint reflection of her past self. It almost looked like someone was still sitting there, watching. As the detectives led her away, the lamp behind her flickered once, then went out completely. And across the street, in Elaine's own apartment window, a shadow moved.